So yeah, pretty simple fly today. There's one tricky part, and it's because it's a tiny feather. You know, but it's the same technique we did last week of wrapping it to create a collar. This collar imitates the legs. So I will say, if you're having issues with doing small collars at home, you can not put it on there and just pick out your dubbing to make it leggier. I think having the feather makes it look more lifelike. And that's how the pattern is originally tied with a starling feather, so we're staying true to that today. But super durable, because it's just rubber, you know, rubber rib and flash. There's really nothing that's going to break, so you can catch a lot of fish on this without having any issues. So yeah, I guess we'll just jump right in because it's fairly quick and easy. I know last Monday, or this past Monday, some people got probably 6 of them tied, because it's pretty quick once you get it going. So obviously we're going to start by putting our bead on there, and small hole on the bead goes onto the point, so then it ends up at the eye of the hook. Last week we had a couple put it on there backwards. Focus. There we go. Okay. If you're fishing faster water or deeper water, you can also do lead wraps behind this bead. It helps it stay there, but it also obviously adds some weight. But for right now, I'm going to forego the lead, and we are using 8/0 thread today. You can get away with 6. Just 8/0 hides itself better. And you know, we're going to use black. You could honestly use whatever color thread you have, but black is kind of, because these guys have a black head, it hides itself better. I tied one with blue thread the other day because that's what I had on, and you can see the blue, so it didn't look great. But yeah, we'll start just by starting our thread right behind the bead, get a little bit of a base down, and then go back to that bead, because we're not going to wrap all the way down. We're going to start immediately by tying in some materials here. And if you break your thread because it's 8/0, you're not going to be the only one tonight. I will pretty much guarantee I'm going to break my thread tonight. I'm not the most gentle with 8/0 thread. So this, if you pick up one of these neon green pieces of rubber here, you'll notice if you look at it, I don't think it's going to show up here. Kinda. One side is flat, basically. The other side is domed. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. There we go. So we're going to tie this in right up at the bead, and we're going to tie it in flat side down. We want that flat side against the hook. I'm actually going to stick this into the bead to kind of help it stay there at first. And you want to get a couple good wraps, you know, 4 or 5 really good, nice tight wraps, and then I'm going to lightly stretch this just to put a little tension on it to try and keep it on top of the hook as you work your way down the bend. And we're going to go about halfway down the bend. And when you get there, if you let your thread hang, it'll be right about in between the barb and the actual end of that. We want a little bit of curvature in this fly, just to, again, make it a little more lifelike. Right there.
Tyler, do you try? Okay, I was going to ask you. Do you try to cover it completely, or not necessarily? Just enough to hold it.
Just enough to hold it, because we're going to wrap something over it, and it's going to disappear. I mean, touching turns always look nicer when you're tying them, but
Sure.
if you're going to cover it, I don't think you really need to. And I'll let you guys catch up. You guys are faster than Monday. Our next material we're going to tie in is this holographic tinsel. This green stuff here. And that's going to be our underbody. And you can kind of see, where'd my fly go? You can kind of see how shiny that is. Whereas if I didn't put any flash on there, it'd be black in the middle. And it would be a really dull fly. So we're going to add a little, we're going to jazz it up a little bit with this holographic Flashabou. And just do a nice loose wrap, tie that in. It doesn't have to be on any particular side.
Where did you start that?
I started that right. You can start it at the bead, you can start it halfway down. It's thin enough, it doesn't really matter, but we want it tied in all the way to the back where this rib comes out. Because we're going to cover this with the rib. So once you get that tied in, move your thread just behind the bead. And then you can proceed to wrap this flash. In your first wrap, because it's at a 90-degree angle, you're going to have to put a little bit of tension on it. And try to cover up all that black thread. So if you overlap your wraps a little bit, that will help. Because this is slippery stuff. And if you let it slide through your fingers, it'll all unravel. So be a little careful. We're just going to wrap. And those of you with rotary vices, this is perfect time to use it if you're comfortable using a rotary function. I'm going to forego that just for demonstration. When I tie these at home, I definitely makes it go a lot faster. So I'm going to stop just before that bead. You can see there's a little bit of a gap there. I want to leave room for the thorax and the legs and everything. So I'm going to capture this with one turn. I always do two on top. I'm going to fold it back and then do two in front just to lock everything in. And then you can trim this excess nice and close. And once you get that locked in, we're going to put our thread just again behind that bead far enough that I got to readjust this, that we can have a little gap there for our dubbing and our legs. So at this point, we've got our underbody tied in. We've got our rib. And you'll notice this rib is pretty stretchy. And on this first turn of rib, you're going to want to stretch it a little bit. It's going to help keep that flat side down, because if I just go to wrap this, it's going to go flat side up on me. So I'm actually going to pull down and kind of wiggle it around just to make sure that it ends up flat side down. And it's kind of tricky, but the key here is to keep the tension on this piece of material so that it doesn't move much. And we're just going to do touching turns so that you end up getting that segmented look.
There's plenty of time to get several of these.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
So I'm going to wrap this up. Again, touching turns. We're not really concerned about a crazy taper or anything. And I'm going to stop just shy of that bead. And notice how I have not let go of this rib. I'm going to do two loose turns. And I'm going to pull straight up on my thread and straight down on this rib. And while keeping tension on my thread, I can let go. I'm going to switch hands, pull this backwards, and do some wraps in front, again, just to lock everything down. And now the hard part, when you tie, I like to tie this stuff off at the underneath the hook, helps hide any mistakes that you may make. But the hard part is not cutting your thread when you cut a material. So if you stick your finger down here and move your bobbin out of the way, you'll never cut your thread. So we're going to come in, get as close as you can, trim that little bit off, and kind of clean it up a little bit, and go right back to that last wind of D-rib. And then we're going to do part 1 of 2 parts of dubbing. So we're going to do just a pinch, just to get a little base. I mean, again, not much at all. I'll get this on my thread. Nice and tight. Slide that up. Just do a quick little thorax. You could leave it there and fish it just like that. But again, if you put a little bit of a soft hackle on there, I think it looks really buggy. So lots of soft hackles use Hungarian partridge and other, you know, like hen capes and stuff like that. These starlings have this really cool black-green iridescence. You can kind of see it.
Oh yeah.
And that just goes really well with this pattern. So I'm going to take this feather and right about, you can kind of see where the fluffy marabou feather starts. I don't want any of that. So I'm going to grab one side and I'm just going to pull it back and it's all going to come off in one piece. I'm going to do that to the other side. And then I'm going to trim this with just enough to tie in. So again, this is the tricky part because it's so small. I'm going to take this feather and the iridescent side is going to be facing me because I want that iridescence out when I wrap it. I'm going to face that iridescent side to me. I'm going to capture this right behind the bead. And this is the tricky part. You want good tension, and we'll see if I had enough tension, because this feather will pull out really easy if you don't tie it in well enough. And last week we didn't have to use hackle pliers because it was a big feather. This week it comes in handy having them. And because these are so small, you might get one wrap all the way around. You might get two. But what I always base it on, because every feather is different, is I'll do one, like so, and I'll kind of look at it. And I think that's all I need. I only need one wrap of feather. So I'm going to tie this off. And the nice thing about hackle pliers is you can let it sit there and it's not going to unravel because there's some weight on it. So I did 2 wraps over it, 2 wraps in front. You can see I just broke that feather just by barely touching it. So this is, you're going to need a fine touch with this. And now it looks pretty crazy. Well, we're not done. We're going to take a little bit more dubbing, a little bit more than the first time. No, just a little bit more. I'll get this on my thread. Slide it up, and now I'm going to take usually my index finger and my thumb. I'm going to pull all those fibers back from that feather, and I'm going to wrap over them. And I've got way too much dubbing on here. I'm going to wrap backwards over those feathers to kind of cover up that tie-in point, and then wrap back up to the eye of the hook. Do a quick little whip finish here, and we're done. Pretty quick and easy. It's faster if you don't put the feather in, but I think it looks really good like that. And